Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody. What do we got going on today?
Well, today, I'm going to tell you about a woman who was energetic, full of gusto, someone that never took no for an answer. She had a drive that could not be stopped. Anything Diane put her mind to, she accomplished. She was half white and half American Indian who belonged to the Mohawk tribe. Want to learn more? Well, let's get into it. This is Season 3, Episode 13, Diane Newton King. Diane's parents were born and raised in Quebec, Canada, but Diane and her siblings were born and raised here in the Mitten. She was half white and half American Indian, a Mohawk. Out of all 4 of her siblings, she had the darkest skin. As a little girl, Diane was extremely close with her father, and when Diane was just 10 years old, her father was complaining of back pain. And before anyone knew what was happening, he was in the hospital and scheduled to have surgery almost immediately. They were told that her father had a bile duct blockage. The surgeon who was supposed to perform the surgery, for whatever reason, didn't. The one who did perform the surgery was a fill-in and wasn't even licensed. Now, don't even ask me how that even happened. Instead of going for the blocked bile duct, this gem somehow shredded Bert's pancreas. So, after surgery, instead of getting better, Diane's father was deteriorating. The cherry on top, he was also given the wrong medication after surgery. It wasn't long before Diane's father, Bert, had passed away from his botched surgery, and Diane's world came crashing down. He went in for his surgery on March 4th, 1966, and passed away on March 27th, 1966. She was lost without her father. She could be heard crying all through the night. She just couldn't accept that her father had died. She couldn't even talk about him. It was her father who always told her that she could do anything in this world. For Diane to move on, she had to block him from her memories. It was just too painful for her to remember him. She wouldn't even look at any photos, and as she grew older, she had a very difficult time remembering what her father even looked like. She was always searching for who she was and what she could be. She was fierce on the outside, but on the inside, she was always a little insecure. Her mother sued after her husband's wrongful death, and it took a couple of years, but the settlement had finally been reached. $300,000. Can you even wrap your head around that nonsense?
Yeah, I don't ever understand why some people sue for wrongful death and they get millions, and some people get, but how do you value a life, How do you put a monetary value on a life? I mean, actually, I know there are mathematical equations that they do have for this. I can't even think of it right now, but there is, there's an insurance thing out there somewhere that does actually have a calculation on how to value a life and what a life is worth and how much any one person can potentially spend on insurance. But is that really what a life is worth? How do you do that math?
Yeah, I don't know. And of course, it's the 1960s.
Would have lived much longer or not,
Yeah. And it's the 1960s. So, people certainly weren't.
That was a lot of money then, no?
It was a lot of money in the 60s. But still, I mean, legal fees, God only knows how much this woman actually ended up with. She's got 5 kids at home.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't last that long.
Yeah. Well, in 1969, Frida, who's Diane's mother, she had remarried a man by the name of Royal Newton. And I love that name, Royal. That's cool. He was a veteran of the Canadian Army and had also once been a court bailiff in Ontario, Canada. But this was not a marriage that brought peace to the family. There was a lot of heavy drinking, a lot of violence, and a lot of police that were called to the Newton home. But as the years went by, finally things settled down, and Diane had even taken her father's last name. Growing up was a little difficult, being half white and half American Indian. They found that Mohawks thought of them as white, and the whites thought of them as Indians. Diane often heard the term for them as half-breed. So it was fitting that Diane and her sister Denise used to sing the song Half-Breed by Cher. One of the lines in the song was, quote, "Both sides been against me since the day I was born." Diane attended North Elementary School, then Grissom Junior High, followed by Sterling Heights High School. In high school, Diane was a member of the Student Senate and the French Club. She was in the Modern Dance Club, sang in the choir, and was a stallionette in the marching band. Diane was a beautiful young woman. She kept herself super busy, and she also had a lot of boyfriends. She was absolutely stunning.
Okay, what are we? You said it so nicely, but a lot of boyfriends. Are we making her sound like she's a little bit fast?
No, I don't.
Are we fast? Are we saying she's gorgeous and fast? Is that what we're saying?
Well, I don't really know how fast she was, but the boys were pining for her. Boyfriend this week maybe, boyfriend next week. Yeah, she certainly had her pick of the litter.
Okay. All right. I just didn't know. I don't know where we're going, so I don't know if she's going to have a lot of boyfriends, and we're not going to know which one did what to her. Is that where we're going with this?
Not yet.
Okay.
All right, so Diane graduated from high school in 1974. She then enrolled at Western Michigan University in your favorite place, Christine, Kalamazoo.
I love that name.
I know. But she dropped out after her first semester. She felt that she needed to refocus and headed home. After much thought, Diane had decided that she would attend a 2-year college. She landed on Mount Ida, which is just outside of Boston. She enrolled, moved, and was attending classes by September of 1975. She earned her associate's degree in physical education. Diane moved back to Michigan by 1978, and that fall enrolled at Wayne State University, where she was now working toward a degree in communications. Next, Diane enlisted in the Michigan National Guard on October 23, 1978. In no time, she was a cadet commander, and in 1981, she was sent to Fort Riley in Kansas to take advanced courses. In 1983, Diane was a second lieutenant. In July of 1983, Diane was in the U.S. Army Signal Corps at Fort Gordon, Georgia. By this point, she had met and fell in love with a man, an ex-cop named Bradford King. He had worked for 14 years as a cop in Pontiac, Michigan. However, Brad was moving from Michigan to Colorado. Diane was so head over heels for this guy that she put in and got a transfer from Georgia to Denver so she could be close to Brad. Just 1 year later, in 1984, Diane was discharged from the Army by choice. Her desire to be with Brad was stronger than her desire for a career in the Army. The other thing that Diane loved about being out west was that Indian tribes were not hidden here. Diane was thrilled to be learning more about who she was and was diving into her culture. She would tell her friends, quote, "You can't know where you're going until you know where you've been." Diane and Brad would attend many powwows together. They would make corn soup and Mohawk meat pies that they would sell during the events. Now, a powwow means spiritual leader. According to Wikipedia, a powwow is an opportunity for Indigenous people to socialize, dance, sing, and honor their cultures. These events can be private or public. Dancing events can be competitive with monetary prizes, and a powwow can last a single day or be a weekend-long event. Diane and Brad were now married, and Diane had her sights to be a news reporter. So she decided she would place a call to Renelda Ware Muse. She was a black anchorwoman at Denver's KCNC TV. Diane told Renelda how much she respected and admired her and pleaded with her to give Diane some advice on how to break into the business. She didn't exactly get the advice she was looking for. Renelda told her that she was too old to start in this career. She told her it was extremely cutthroat, that you will make peanuts when you first start, and that only a small percentage of people, especially women, will make it big. She was told to find a smaller city or even get into radio. The hours would be long and the demands would be great. People will backstab and climb over you while digging their claws into you on their way over you. Later, Muse would recall this conversation with Diane. Quote, everything was against her. She was making such a late start, it seemed impossible. It's very, very difficult to make a transition into this business from another field. I told her the worst, but nothing that I said deterred her. She was a woman who knew what she wanted. She was aggressive and tenacious. She was determined to get into the business. You meet so many people who want to do things, and after a while you can discern who has what it takes. When the smoke cleared from what I said, Diane was still standing, and I was impressed by that. Diane's motto, quote, fake it till you make it. I think I've heard that a time or two.
Yeah, we all have to use that on occasion.
Mm-hmm. So Brad supported Diane in her endeavor to make it as a reporter. Brad had been married once before. He was 11 years older than Diane. He also had a daughter from his previous marriage. Now, as I mentioned before, Brad was a police officer for 14 years in Pontiac. He had a master's degree in criminal justice and was willing to do whatever it took for Diane to accomplish her goals. Diane was thankful that Renelda gave her the advice she did, and before she even started working in the business, she typed up the following note and sent it to Renelda on May 22nd, 1985. Quote, I must say you were right when you said that people in the business were very helpful and supportive. I'm sure there's a wink wink there. Once again, thank you for everything. I will get this job, and I am not stopping until I get exactly what I want. Soon, Diane got her foot in the door as a production assistant and researcher. She would line up guests for KRMA TV Channel 6 in Denver. Financially, it was tough. She was making only $8,000 a year. Yeah, you heard that right. $8,000 a year.
Banana.
Mm-hmm.
Even for that time, that's really low. That's like what kids made on paper routes back then.
Talk about weeding people out, right? Make the sacrifice or you're not in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. But Diane was paying her dues, and she was just fine with that. She knew she had to climb the ladder, and she would. In the meantime, Diane started putting together her audition tapes while polishing her delivery and style. In just a year and a half, Diane landed her first on-air gig. The station that Renelda worked at just hired a reporter from KJCT-TV in Grand Junction, Colorado, which meant there was an opening. Diane got that job and now is making $13,000 a year. Big step up.
Almost doubled.
Almost doubled.
Almost.
Yep. But the thing was, Grand Junction was over 200 miles away from Denver and Brad. But for her to reach her goals, she had to go. She had to make her move. Within months, the lease that Brad and Diane had in Denver was up on their apartment, and soon Brad would join her. But now Brad wasn't working, and as you can imagine, the stress of all of that was hitting them hard. Diane was doing incredibly well at her new station. She was a dog with a bone. She was aggressive and did whatever it took to get the story. Not only was Diane working extremely hard to succeed in her new career, but she was also giving back to her community. Diane was president of the Denver chapter of the National Organization for Native American Women. She also worked at a Catholic outreach soup kitchen in Colorado. She gave her time to a program called Senior Showcase and did community work for senior citizens. While in Grand Junction, she had done a story and involved herself in Partners. It's a program like Big Brothers or Big Sisters, which pairs adult role models with troubled teens. This girl was unstoppable. It's now March 6, 1988. Diane gave birth to their son, of which they named Marler. Now, Marler, this was her father's last name, so this was momentous for her and a way for her to honor her long-past father. 2 years have now passed, and Diane's dedication and hard work were finally paying off from KJCT in Grand Junction. Diane was hired by WUHQ in Battle Creek, Michigan, as the morning news anchor in the nation's 38th largest market. She was to start her new job on February 13th, 1989. It was time to pack up the family and head back home to Michigan. Wow, talk about full circle, right? Diane was now making $22,600 annually, so she's climbing. While in Grand Junction and supporting his wife's dreams, Brad was doing all kinds of odd jobs to help support the family. He did everything from delivering newspapers to flipping burgers, working in jewelry stores, selling men's clothing, working at a gas station, and counseling patients at St. Mary's Hospital. Now, I can't even begin to think about how degrading this time's been for Brad. I mean, this guy has a master's degree. He comes from a well-to-do family, and these are the types of jobs that he's doing? None of it makes any sense to me at all. Why? He's a smart guy, and that's the best job he can get?
Well, just because he has all of those degrees and accolades behind him doesn't really mean that he knows how to apply them in any way. Maybe he had an application issue in his life. Application of knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Some people look good on paper, but just don't know how to really take the steps, walk the walk.
Very true. Now, once back in Michigan, the family was living in Battle Creek in a 2-story apartment with a basement. So it was basically kind of like, to me, even though it was an apartment, it was like 4 of these per building. So it was 2 stories with a basement. I call that a condo, but it was an apartment they were renting. And things were going great at WUHQ. And soon the couple moved from Battle Creek to Marshall. This is where Todd's parents live. They had found an amazing farmhouse to rent in the country, located at 16240 Division Drive. The home was on 500 acres, had a large barn, and a few other outbuildings. Wow, what a killer place to rent. Diane would continue her community work in the Mitten as well. She served on the board of directors of the Salvation Army because she wanted to get involved in the community so she could meet the needs of the people. She didn't stop there. Oh no. She was also very active in the food bank of Southwest Michigan after she had done a story about child hunger. Her slogan, quote, "You can be there when a child is hungry." And this was printed on posters and grocery bags all around town. Diane also organized a campaign to collect canned goods for a program called Second Harvest. They would distribute food through the church pantries and small towns in and around Battle Creek. This woman utilized every moment of her time for her career and to give back. And wow, so impressive.
Well, this is good. At least we're painting her in a very good light now, because she started this out by calling her fast. I just want to point that out.
I didn't mean to call her fast. Damn it.
All right.
She was
a beautiful, fast child, and now she's a very nice, giving, altruistic woman. So
very much so.
Bonus points for her.
Yeah, very much so. Now, at this point, Brad is now working part-time as an instructor of criminal justice back at his alma mater, Western Michigan University. One semester, he worked Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6 to 8:30 p.m., then just a class on Thursday.
Well, he's utilizing his degrees now.
Yeah, finally.
Okay.
Yep. So Brad would teach students by letting them teach themselves. For example, he would tell them to break into groups, come up with a crime, and then have them try to figure out how to get away with it. But they could never pull off the perfect crime because he told them that there will always be evidence left behind. There could never be the perfect crime. After being back in Michigan for a year, Diane was pregnant with their second child. Her career was in full swing now. She had her local news morning segments on NBC. She would host her local news spot, then back to NBC for national news. Diane would also host 2 more segments lasting 5 minutes in the afternoon. One day while on set, a call came into the studio for Diane. The caller asked to speak to Diana, his voice slow and a little odd. When Diane took the call, the voice on the other end reminded her of her call with Reynelda. He told her that he looked up to her and was looking for advice on how to break into the world of reporting. Talk about another full circle. Diane felt honored that now it was her who was getting calls for advice. So, just like Reynelda, she gave her advice to the man and wished him luck. But this wouldn't be the last time she heard from this man. Oh no, it was just the beginning. Diane was getting calls daily now at the station. Every time he called, he asked to speak with Diana. She would always take the call, but now the caller was inviting her to go out to lunch with him. Well, she had finally had enough of that. She asked him to stop calling. She told everyone at the station that she will no longer be taking any calls and asked that they could please screen her calls. But that didn't work either. By now, Diane is approximately 9 months pregnant. She came home to the farmhouse, and when she arrived, she checked the mail to find a letter that looked odd to her. How did this get in her mailbox? She opened it up to find a note that said, quote, "You should have gone to lunch with me." This was not any ordinary note. The letters were cut out of magazines and taped to the paper. Diane frantically looked all around. Who would know where she lived? Had someone followed her home that she never noticed? She lost it and started crying hysterically. She and Marler immediately left the property. She had gone to a friend's home, Barbara, and shared the letter with her. Barbara immediately called the Calhoun County Police Department. Upon their arrival, Diane handed over the note. The officer looked over the note and thought, how strange. Why would a total stranger cut out letters and paste them? A stranger has no reason to worry about their penmanship being recognized. The letter was placed in a plastic bag and taken to the police station as evidence. Diane had called Western Michigan to get a hold of Brad, but he was not available. Diane was not about to go home until Brad was with her. Finally, Brad called and heard about the details of the note. He arrived at Barbara's home close to 10 p.m. that night. Then Diane, Brad, and Marler headed back to the farm together. Immediately, Diane and Brad put together a safety plan. They would purchase and set up floodlights on the home, and Diane would never, ever be at the home alone. The couple were also given a 6-month-old Doberman pinscher for protection from one of her sisters. But Brad had allergies to dogs, so they would put the puppy in the barn or chain him up outside. Diane had told all of her friends and family about the call she was receiving at work, as well as the disturbing letter in the mailbox. Brad was home every day except for Thursday nights, as this is when he would teach his class at the university. When Brad was away teaching, Diane simply just wouldn't go home. She would go to a friend's home or invite a friend over to her home until Brad returned from work. When Diane would pull into her driveway, she would honk the horn and she would stay in her locked vehicle until she saw Brad step out onto the front porch. Then and only then would she exit the vehicle. Her mother, Frida, would later testify that when she was with Diane, they would pull into the driveway. If Brad was not home, Diane would drive around the home in her vehicle, inspecting the house as she drove by all sides of it to make sure nothing looked like it was broken into. Once she surveyed the home and the barn and everything looked untouched, they would then get out of the car and enter the home.
This is like really uber careful after just phone calls and a note.
Yeah, she was not taking any chances. She was freaked out.
They automatically assumed she had a stalker from the news. And I guess they automatically assumed that it was this guy that was calling her because he also said, you should have went to lunch with me. But at no point in time did they ever know who this was. Like, he didn't give her any more information when she gave him the advice and wished him luck?
No, he did not.
Oh.
And never gave a name.
Trace the calls back then? Like, that wasn't a thing? I would think at a news station they would be able to trace calls.
Yeah, you'd think so, but, you know, it's the late 80s, early 90s. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess they also probably weren't taking stalking very serious.
Right.
Anyway.
Right,
okay.
Right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yep. So it's now November 20th, 1990, and baby Katari was born at Oaklawn Hospital in Marshall. Frida and Royale had come to see their newborn granddaughter from Sterling Heights, and that's by Detroit. They were staying out at the farm with Brad and Marler, but Brad wasn't so thrilled about a new baby. He was at the farm and not with Diane at the hospital like most dads would have been. I'm sure he was there at one point, but he didn't make it a priority to stay there with Diane. During her maternity leave, Diane would make a couple of trips to Sterling Heights to visit with her mother and sister Denise with the children. Brad would also make the trip with her. Brad was a bit of an oddball at these get-togethers. He was quiet and passive, which was the complete opposite of his wife. The family didn't know what attracted Diane to him, but Diane loved him, and that's all that mattered to them. If Diane loved him, that's all they needed. It's now February 7th, 1991. Diane would soon be returning to work, so she decided to pack up the kids and head to Sterling Heights for another visit with her mother and sister. Once Diane had arrived, she told her mother that she would like to leave the kids there for the night on Saturday, February 9th, so she could head home so the couple could have some quality time together. Then Brad would come for the kids on Sunday. But Katari was not feeling well. The 3-month-old was pretty sick with a cold. Also, Diane was still nursing. At this time, Katari was 3 months old and Marler was 3 years old. Frida, her mother, didn't think it was a good idea to leave the baby as Diane was nursing. She did, however, say that she would keep Marler. But when it was time for Diane to leave on Saturday, Marler was really fussing and crying. So Diane just thought, you know what? I'm just taking both the kids home. As she was packing them up in her car, she said, quote, "Boy, is your daddy going to be surprised to see you." Before Diane would head home, she always called Brad so he would know when to expect her. But Royale, Diane's stepfather, was on the phone, so she couldn't make that call. She asked her mother to call Brad as soon as the line was free, so he knew that she was on her way home. So, you know, the good old glory days of no cell phones.
Yeah, no cell phones and a single line. A single house line.
Yeah, remember the busy sound?
Yeah, funny.
Yeah. It was approximately 4:15 p.m. on Saturday, February 9th, 1991, when Diane packed up the kids and hit the road. It would take Diane about 2 to 2.5 hours to get there. Royale finally finished his call, so Frida called Brad to let him know when Diane had left and when she would be home. No mention of the kids being in the car, mind you. Frida lay down on the couch watching some TV and had fallen asleep. When she woke, it was 8 p.m., and once she realized what time it was, she realized that Diane never called her to tell her that she made it home safely. Initially, she thought, I'll just lay back down. But then she was like, no, I'm calling. Frida called the farmhouse. Brad answered the phone. When he was asked if Diane made it home, he told her there had been an accident. Frida then asked about the kids. Brad told her that they were with him and that Diane was in the emergency room at Oaklawn Hospital and she should call the hospital. When she asked why Brad wasn't with her daughter, he said, they told me I had to stay here. Diane had made it home with the kids, but when she arrived, Brad had been out walking the property. He started to realize it was getting dark and that Diane should be getting home any minute now. When he got close to the house, he saw Diane's vehicle and saw Diane lying on the gravel driveway. He ran up to her, saw that she was not responsive. He then ran inside the home to call for help. Now, even though Brad was an ex-police officer and taught criminal justice at the university, he was in shock and couldn't remember how to call 911. So, instead, he dialed 0. He was telling the operator that his wife was down in the driveway and that he needed help. He was patched into Calhoun County Dispatch. He again explained what he had found and was told to stay on the phone with dispatch until the police and ambulance had arrived. And that's exactly what he did. Soon a police car was in the driveway, the ambulance just behind, waiting to turn into the driveway until they received the signal from police that it was safe to approach. The officer could hear a voice coming from inside the house yelling, "Help my wife, I'm on the phone with dispatch." The officer signaled to the medics to move in. Diane was seen lying on her back. Her legs were folded up underneath her body. Her arms were either above her head or out to the sides. Immediately, they felt for a carotid pulse, but felt only a beat or two. One medic ran back to the ambulance for their intubation kit, while the others stayed and performed CPR. When placing a laryngoscope into Diane's throat, they saw blood. She was successfully intubated. The medics then cut off Diane's sweatshirt, and that's when they saw it. Diane had been shot. They called out to the officer that this woman had been shot, not once, but twice. Once in the chest and once just above her pubic bone. They quickly put Diane in the ambulance and took off for Oaklawn Hospital, the same place where Diane had just given birth to their daughter just 3 months earlier.
Oh my God. So this is how Brad applied his knowledge? That's my first question.
You're on the right path, girl.
Oh, God.
Yep. But it was too late. Now, some of the materials that I read said that Diane was dead on scene, and some say she died in the ER at Oaklawn. My bet is she died on scene. The bullet in the chest had pierced her ascending aorta, and the bullet that entered just above her pubic bone had traveled through her abdomen, went through her lung, breaking her ribs. So I'll leave it to you, but I'm saying she was dead on scene. And remember those little kids that were in the car? Unbeknownst to them, they had just witnessed the murder of their mother. Now get this. Brad had left the kids in the car until the ambulance pulled away with Diane. Can you believe that shit right there?
Well, immediately my brain goes to, okay, obviously he did this. Obviously he set it up. Obviously it's his own wacky brain, and this was his scenario that he set up while he was teaching students to think up the perfect crime. So it was he, and he took all this time to do it. So, and he wasn't aware that the kids were even with her. He thought she was just coming home like they had spoken about. So I think that he was just so into his crime scenario that he probably didn't even think of the kids.
Yeah.
But then again, I guess I'm jaded and I'm automatically assuming this guy's no good all the way, head to toe.
Yep, I'm with you. Now, More officers were called to the farmhouse, including Gary Lyle and his canine, Travis. As officers were looking at the scene, they looked over at the barn and noticed that a second-story door was open slightly. They were aware of the stalking calls and the letter that was in the mailbox. Gary and Travis decided to have a look at that barn. Once on the second level, looking out of the door that was cracked, they looked down in the hay and something shiny caught their eye. It was a .22 caliber casing. Now these are small, very small caliber bullet, which I also have to say was in the plan. Gary put a pen down next to the casing so they wouldn't lose sight of it. Now here's a small nugget of information about all guns that eject shell casings. They always eject to the right. So Gary put Travis to sniff to the left of the bullet. Now here's a little background on Travis. He was a German Shepherd that was donated to the academy when he was just 6 months old. He was trained in the canine unit with Gary as his handler. Travis was amazing at his job. He tracked down bank robbers, B&Es, even found a wandering, disoriented mental patient, and saved his handler from an ambush by felons that were hiding in a swamp. Travis had found guns that were thrown from vehicles that were involved in crimes and could even pinpoint dimes that were thrown into fields during demonstrations. Gary kept a log of all Travis had accomplished. In 1 in 10 calls, it was Travis that assisted in the arrests. Now here's how tracking works with dogs, and I find this incredibly interesting. The human body has about 60 trillion cells, and when cells die and shed from the body, they shed at 50 million cells per second. Yeah, you heard that right, 50 million cells per second. When bacteria attacks those cells, they create a gas. When a human sweats during a crime from their forehead, underarms, and palms, this creates a unique scent, which stems from fear and apprehension. Well, Travis picked up on the fear scent on the second story of the barn. When Gary took Travis into the barn and pointed left to the .22 caliber casing, his nose went down, ears back, and tail went up. He's on it. Leash was tight as Travis was pulling, which meant he was on the scent. Travis led Gary out of the barn and to the left, out into the field behind the farmhouse. Further and further, they went behind the farmhouse, as the skies became quite dark with night. Gary was utilizing his flashlight so he could see. Gary started to notice muddy boot prints in the mud and melting snow. So you see, for February, it had warmed up quite a bit, so snow was melting and things were a bit muddy. Then they came to a creek. Travis was really wagging his tail now. He jumped in and through the creek and then made his way back over the creek to his handler, Gary, leash still tight, as Travis's tail was just a wagging. They ended up back on the road and back to the house. They made a giant circle. By the time they had gotten back to the driveway, Travis lost the scent. There were a lot of people there now, more police and now reporters and onlookers. It was getting late, and by this time, Brad was taken to the police station for questioning. While the sheriff was talking with Brad, a call came into the station. It was Rael, Diane's stepdad. They had called the hospital, but once they were on the phone with hospital personnel, they told them that they couldn't give them any information and advised they call the Calhoun County Police Department for more information. When the sheriff heard who was on the line, he handed the phone to Brad. He coldly said, quote, "Diane's dead," then gave the phone back to the officer. Now, can I just say, you are one cold-hearted son of a bitch. That's how you're going to tell Diane's mother? Your mother-in-law, your wife, and the mother of your children is no longer alive? I don't know if I have a word strong enough for this piece of shit.
Yeah, well, on one hand, just because, I always like to look at all the different pathways and not convict this guy before due diligence. However, maybe he was in shock and he's also being interrogated. So there's all of these psychoanalytical things that we can apply to him. That being said, this guy's a piece of shit because you know damn well that he did this.
Mm-hmm.
And he has no care in the world for Diane's parents.
Exactly.
Callous, cold, all of those things.
All the adjectives for this dickhead. So while this ding-dong was at the police department being interviewed, the search of the grounds at 16240 Division Drive continued until the early morning hours. Now, this is what police know. Diane was shot twice, once in the heart, and the trajectory of that bullet entered her body from a downward angle. The kill shot came from the second story of the barn through the open door. But what about that second shot? Diane is down on her back, arms stretched out. That trajectory did not come from above, as it entered just above her pubic bone and traveled up through her abdomen into her lung. The only way that could happen is if the shooter descended from the barn and either knelt or laid down when that shot was fired. Now, as I mentioned, Travis and Gary were tracking a scent. Travis had become very excited at the creek behind the farmhouse on the property. And you're not going to believe this, but in the creek, they found a handful of .22 caliber casings and a .22 rifle that was stuck into the bed of the creek as if it had been poked down barrel first and pushed down with force. The stock of the gun was sticking up out of the water. All casings and the .22 rifle were taken into evidence. Was this guy practicing and thought that this was a surefire way to get rid of evidence?
I mean, hello, he was teaching students how to think up the perfect crime. And he obviously had a long time to think about all these details. This is all very, very, very calculated.
Absolutely, it is.
And this is what he decided to apply all of his knowledge with. So you were wondering why he was such a deadbeat and didn't have great jobs and all that. It's because he's a psycho. And this is what he was applying his brain power to.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now he should remember that there is no perfect crime. There will always be evidence. All roads were leading back to Brad. They were sure he was the one who killed Diane, but it would still take some time before they had everything that they needed to arrest him. They really wanted to arrest him after the funeral. During the viewing of Diane at the funeral home and at the gathering after Brad had played the part. At times he would cry, at times he was quiet. He walked along arm in arm with Frida, Diane's mother, all the while playing the grieving husband. But Brad wasn't arrested after the funeral. There was still a lot of detective work to be done. It would take a year, but they finally got him. Now, I hate to do this to you guys, but I'm going to stop here. When we pick back up next week, we will start with Brad's murder trial.
Well, at least you're going to stop it when we already know that he's a calculated piece of shit. And he's definitely the one that has been low-key stalking her. I mean, we don't know that for sure yet because they're going to, I'm sure, go through the trial. And I'm sure you're going to tell me all about all the ebbs and flows of the trial and maybe he didn't do it, maybe he did do it, or whatever you're going to get into. But at least we got to the full story of what happened. And now we'll just get into the nitty-gritty of how it happened during the trial portion, I assume.
Yeah, it's very revealing. It's very revealing. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will see you back on Wednesday for Round Robin. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.